Hello, my name is Austin Peters. I am the Data Pros Consulting CISSP security professional, and I am here today to teach the IT users of the SeeVE utility we have on a few processes and methods of collecting the data and filling out the tool to use it effectively to protect your business. So let's go ahead and quickly just start by sharing a quick example. So make sure, first off, that you are accessing the SeeVE tool from dataprosconsulting.com and that you do have a secure connection. If you do not see these two things, you are possibly being phished, and you definitely don't want to do that. So always verify the URL at the top here. The how to use section here is quite simply what we're going to be going over today, just in a slight bit more detail. So the purpose of SeeVE is, of course, cataloging all of your attack surface or your systems that you have. That will include software, hardware, open source libraries, and operating systems that are part of your stack. So when you load this page, you'll initially notice it grabs your current browser. In that case, I'm running Mozilla Firefox, and this is a great starting point. Browsers also count as business tools that you use to just conduct business. Everything can be vulnerable in the craziest ways nowadays. You wouldn't think that an open source library that your website uses, the like hundreds of open source libraries your web dev team brought in, could be the one that takes your company down, but that's just the reality of things. So you really do need to do a great job of what's known as a system bill of materials, or a system inventory, or system supply chain. There's tons of names for it, but that is effectively what SeeVE is helping you achieve. And it just has some extra features like the ability to actually search for the vulnerabilities for those systems if properly documented. So the most important columns are product name, type, vendor, and version. These four are what are necessary at the most basic level for the SeeVE tool to go and search for vulnerabilities. You do have to get the names right. They do have to match the system documentation that's publicly available either in the NIST or MITRE CP dataset or the OSV dataset. If you don't have a match there, you have a typo, you type Mozilla Firefox as the product name instead of just Firefox, the tool will not return the expected results. So always as a second checking method, open one of these two links up, OSV for open source libraries and the NIST or MITRE data set for everything else, just to make sure that you are putting in the correct information here. So most important things to do. First off, you want to pick your targets based on priority. So if you have a lot of systems and are just not sure where to start, try and find your critical ones or your high priority ones. What systems, if they went down or were taken over by hackers, would have basically like a showstopper level of impact for your business? That'll be anything with like confidential data or like patient information if you're in healthcare, or PII or PFI, personal identifiable information and personal financial information, respectively. Any of those things can have massive regulatory, legal, and reputational impacts to your business. Effectively, in a small and medium business realm, that's pretty much enough to end you in many a case. But if you're a larger business, you may have a little more risk tolerance, maybe not, depending on your sector. Excellent conversations to have with your business leadership. However, let's go ahead and start with the basics. Operating systems, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, want to get those in first. Your next order of business, just based on what we see attackers going off after more, would be your mission critical support infrastructure, your databases like SQL Server, your firewalls, your networking equipment. These are also common targets for modern attackers, and not something you might necessarily think about up front. But again, that's just the reality of it. Is actually firewalls are notorious for being one of the more common vectors of attack to actually take down a business and really get in. And these guys can sit in your system for quite a while before they actually make their move. And that makes it very hard to really identify and catch these guys in the act. So all going through, pretty simple. You just click on new, and then product name. I'll just pick on Windows here for a little bit. So this will be Windows. I'm going to go to say Windows 11 24H2. That's the version of Windows that I'm currently on. The type of system here is an operating system. Description: our computers run this. Vendor: Microsoft. And then version. Easiest way to get version in Windows, just open up our settings here, go to System, and go to About. Hopefully you are following a patch management system and all your Windows are taking automatic patches. So for Windows, unfortunately, the OS build number is your version number, and they're not great because, and this is where understanding these data sets is important. Microsoft's versioning numbers for Windows actually has a 10.0 in front of Windows 10 and 11 systems. And then you put in your OS build number. So every vendor is different, unfortunately. That's just one of the gripes of being in IT is vendor versionings all over the place. You want to see crazy, look at a Linux versioning like Ubuntu's. They have letters randomly stuffed around in these, which can make it quite a bit complex to go find them. Now, other important things. Your vendor contact name, email, phone number. Very important if you're getting supports like Cisco, for example. Perfect example. You know, your networking support vendor, you want to make sure those guys are documented in your tool here, because if something happens and the main person who supports the system on your team is out, what are you going to do? Having someone to call for help, that's very important for a business to have in their business continuity and disaster recovery plan. And you can hover over any of these column headers and get some help on what we're looking for this particular field and why it is valuable. The other things you'll see here are IT owner, business owner, support contact. Each of these fields is important. In the case of IT systems like Windows, IT owner and business owner may be the same individual. And your IT support contact might just be your help desk. Status is the system live or being implemented. We have all sorts of selections here just for the software lifecycle. Very useful for if you're supporting legacy systems or in the process of decommissioning some, just to keep track of everything. Business criticality. These are important, of course, just to identify how critical a system is so you can help dedicate your time effectively on your team, because we all know ain't enough time in the day for everything that needs doing. So this will help you kind of design a strategy around which systems you need to address first versus things that you can just wait a little on. Data classifications here. This is a number of different data classifications, like does this system contain personal financial information, employee info, health information, legally privileged, government. You can add more into here, but this is just useful for helping tag legal risks with the system. Your chief legal officer or your legal contacts would definitely want to be a part of this conversation because they'll be able to help you a lot with this activity. Another thing we have is dependent systems. If you have a dependency chain, like for example, you run on Azure or AWS, and that would be a system in itself that you're going to document, but say you run servers on them. So your dependency on your servers, like SQL Server, would be on your Azure. So very useful for establishing basically your software supply chain or your system supply chain on documenting, hey, if this system goes down, here are all the other systems that are also going to be down or impacted because of it. So again, a very, very useful thing to have. So I'm going to go ahead here and quickly load up an example that we use in our business side demonstration of a more robust one. So we've got some information here filled out, and let's go and actually run this thing. In this case, I have some notes here on each of the systems, including, for a couple of them, some interesting callouts of worthy of note while using this utility. So in this case, of course, Firefox, my current browser, is patched and clean. That's good. That's what we want to see across the board. Fortinet, this is a firewall, and you can see this guy has not been patched in quite a while. This right here is more than sufficient to destroy your business. This vulnerability here is, from a hacker's perspective, there's a lot of criticals here. Many of these just basically, I can bypass authentication chains. For example, I can pick one of these and click on this, and I'll open a new tab here. And this right here is one of the methods used in the Fog ransomware virus to actually get in and take over your business, like completely take over the firewall, hijack your VPN or your Radius client for remote authentication. So basically, let your users work from home and remote into a computer. And at that point, the hackers can do what they want. We've seen this exploited in the wild, in real instances. This isn't just making stuff up. We've actually seen vulnerabilities such as this one for this product exploited. This isn't a joke. When it says 9.8 critical, there is exploits out there that are being leveraged. It's easy to do for hackers. Heck, a kid in middle school can do it. This needs to be patched ASAP. So if you see systems with criticals, in this case, the hardware firewall is a critical system. If your firewall goes down, your business is not going to be operational. And if that firewall is also taken over, the business impact of your network functionally being hijacked is also catastrophic. So that would be the highest severity. And as you can see here, this is going to be, for an IT team, the very first thing you're going to be doing after this exercise is patching this thing or reaching out to the vendor for support. Google Chrome, this is only a month old, this version of Google Chrome here at the time of recording. 11 vulnerabilities already. These are just being analyzed. So depending on your risk tolerance, maybe you need, or you have a lot of systems that you need to attack, maybe this one's just slightly lower on your priority list. It is actually a quick win. With Google Chrome, there are plenty of IT tricks to get it to auto patch on all computers in your network. But in this case, these are all fresh off the presses. Maybe not the top priority, but definitely something to look into. You do want to read them, though, if you have the time. As you can see here, there is one that they're thinking might be a critical. So maybe your analysis will change, but that depends on your risk tolerance. This, though, is something important to talk about. And this is actually a problem in the security industry that we're working with industry leaders and even government on trying to solve. In this case, I picked a router I knew had a critical firmware vulnerability in this exact firmware version. You will see it has 0 vulnerabilities. The reason, though, that this tool is functionally, you're going to ask, like, why is it lying? That's actually because the authority that reported it didn't actually fill out the CVE record correctly. So unfortunately, this tool is only good as the data that it sources from, and unfortunately, in this one example, the data is not great. So you definitely do want to do your own research just to double check. SeeVE isn't a guarantee of perfect data. We are looking into ways to make it more reliable, and maybe even doing things like free text searching, even looking into AI to help find where there's data entry flubs, such as this one here. And also, of course, we were working with NIST and MITRE and other organizations to try and see what's possible just industry-wide to make this a better, more reliable solution. You can see here, yeah, we put apples in here. I know older IT common sense is that Macs are not hackable. Unfortunately, that was maybe the case 20 years ago, but it is 2025. And as you can see here, that's not true. So this is a relatively recent major version of Mac OS 15. 15.4 is the patch version for these vulnerabilities here, and they do exist. SQL Server, again, SQL Server also has a lot of vulnerabilities if they are not patched. And you can see some of these were reported back in November, and it is April. So again, staying on top of your patching can prevent all these vulnerabilities from existing in your system. Final one here is websites. Historically, there hasn't been a great way to really catalog open source vulnerability risk. Now there is with OSV Dev, which is an open source tool for really aggregating a bunch of different open source vulnerability products. So this right here is just demonstrating a simple AngularJS website, very popular framework currently. There's tons more. You can fill in any other major framework here. And you can see even those guys have vulnerabilities here. And even simple things like Bootstrap, just your user interface, can have vulnerabilities like cross-site scripting, where if a user enters a very specific prompt in, like, say, a comment section on a blog post, they can actually hijack your website and do some pretty nasty stuff. One other thing to note here that you may have heard of or may not have is something called library poisoning, where a hacker actually puts into the open source community, either on a well-known, robust project or just making their own, a library that has malicious code loaded in it. So in this case, the Visa UI Angular was originally advertised as a really nice user interface. It's kind of like Visa branded for collecting payment information. In practicality, what it was just sending the credit card information and everything that was being collected to the hacker that released this library. NPM actually wound up removing it from their repository because of how bad that was once it was found and reported. Unfortunately, with how web development actually works in reality, you have to have your web development team go in and actually remove that from and all of the source code and dependencies from your installation and recompile and repost your website without this in there. And that can be a bit of effort. However, in this case, the hacker is literally stealing your customer's credit card information. That is actually severe and has a huge regulatory risk. So you're going to need to look into that kind of scenario. So hopefully this has been informative on some of the vectors of attack that this will help you identify and some of the pros and cons of this tool. If you do need any assistance, this is too big of a project for you, you're not sure even where to begin with finding all your systems, you took it over from another IT group, if you're an MSP, we know the story, got it all the time, just reached out to us through this Contact Us button here in the How to Use section, and we'll be more than happy to get you going. Have a great day.